Welcome to Northlandia, a place to bring your curiosity because here you'll find curiosities. I'm Wyatt Buckner of the Duluth News Tribune, and I'll be your guide as we discover the unique and fascinating stories here in the Northland. Here we celebrate the region's distinctive people, places, and history. In this episode, we visit an Iron Range church that was converted into a music haven. Let's venture forth into Northlandia. Here to take us on this somewhat musical journey to Sparta, Minnesota, is arts and entertainment reporter Jay Gabler. Jay, welcome back.
Glad to be back.
Yeah, it's good to be back, listeners. For those who follow us closely, we did kind of miss a week a couple weeks ago. It was right during the peak of fire coverage up in the Northland. We had 3 fires going all at once for those who are watching our coverage of the Camp House fire, the Jenkins Creek fire, and the Munger Shaw fire. That definitely consumed our time and resources. You, Jay, as well, spent a day up there with me as well. So there simply was not time for recording that week. There was a column from that week, though, that Terry Caddo did put together. The headline for that reading as 31,000 plants preserved, documented thanks to UMD botanist. So if you are looking to fill that gap of Northlandia, you're not already following the column, there is still a column for you to check from that missed week. So we apologize for not having a podcast for that week. There just simply was not time. And also going off of that, moving forward, we are adjusting to a monthly release schedule. As listeners might be aware from the previous episode, that Jimmy has now stepped back from Northlandia to focus on other reporting endeavors. But here we are with Jay, getting back on track here.
The quality is going to be so high when it's a monthly series. Every week, just imagine 4 weeks of quality just packed into that one monthly episode.
Oh man, Jay, putting the pressure on now. Putting the pressure on us to make sure all the episodes moving forward are extra good, which hopefully we're starting off with a good one here.
For sure. This is a story that's been on my radar for a long time. Since before I was at the DNT, I was at The Current, the Minnesota Public Radio music station, very closely following Minnesota music. That was a big part of my job, and I just kept hearing about this recording studio up on the Iron Range. I never got up there because I was based in St. Paul's, where NPR's headquarters is, and never got up here. But once I was up at the News Tribune, I thought I really want to check out Sparta Sound.
And maybe for those who don't know, and I certainly didn't before this point, where exactly is Sparta, Minnesota? Because I was a little confused at first when you brought the story. Every time you said Sparta, my mind for some reason went to Sparta, Wisconsin, which is very much not in the Northland and much further away than Sparta, Minnesota.
Yeah, there are various Spartas in the world. A lot of Minnesotans don't know where Sparta, Minnesota is, and even a lot of people who are in the Northland don't know. And you don't need to feel bad because Rich Mattson, who founded and runs Sparta Sound, along with his partner Jermaine Gemberling, he said he grew up in West Eveleth, and Sparta today is sort of functionally an outlying neighborhood of Eveleth, and even Rich didn't know where Sparta was, having grown up in West Eveleth. Sparta was a mining town, a lot of places on the range. It was founded when ore was discovered, and then it was thriving at the very turn of the 20th century, which is when this church that became Sparta Sound was built. It was built around 1900, and the town was apparently booming for the first few years of the 20th century, but then ore was actually discovered under the town of Sparta, so we had to get at that ore, right? So a lot of houses were moved, and mining was done, and what remains of the old historical Sparta is really just a handful of houses. It was dissolved as a town in 1911, but a handful of structures remain that are sort of what remains of what was once the mining town of Sparta. So basically, think Eveleth, but this corner of Eveleth that you may not have known was there, even if you are from Eveleth. And now that it's a recording studio, the relative isolation of Sparta is a pro. Here's Jermaine Gemberling explaining what people love about coming to record at Sparta Sound.
I think what makes Sparta Sound special for people is that really they feel like they can disconnect maybe from all the other worldly distractions for a while they come here, because they're sometimes their cell phone doesn't even work. They have to walk down the road depending on where they're from and what provider they have. So they can't really do all the things that they would normally be called away to do. So I think people appreciate that because it's kind of a getaway for them too, where they can really focus on their work and project and take care of business.
I can speak for myself. When we visited there, my cell service was very near non-existent. So I must be one of those providers that was no good for that.
Yeah, you feel like everywhere is connected these days, but you're kind of at the frontier of connection when you're out at Sparta. So yeah, it definitely feels like you're getting away from it all. And it's very bucolic. It's a beautiful little spot.
Mm-hmm. And so what exactly is Sparta Sound outside of, the obvious, we're talking about a recording studio here, but what differentiates it, obviously, besides the isolation a little bit?
Yeah, so it's a former church. It was an apostolic Lutheran church. And as Rich explains, apostolic Lutherans, it's a denomination that was founded by Finnish and Norwegian American immigrants. And when it came to designing churches, they were not into bells and whistles. We're not even talking a steeple. Basically, it is a building where you can congregate for services, and other than that, pretty Spartan in terms of any architectural flourishes. So even from the outside, you wouldn't necessarily look at it and think, oh, that was a church. It's not like, for example, Sacred Heart Music Center in Duluth, a former Catholic church, very, very, very obviously a former Catholic church. You are never going to think that this building was built as anything other than a Catholic church. Knowing that Sparta Sound was once an apostolic Lutheran church, actually was for a very long time, you kind of need to know where to look. Rich pointed out to us, okay, here's where the altar was, here was the entry, and then it was a smaller sanctuary. I mean, even when Sparta was booming, it was still a emerging mining town, was not a huge community. Anyway, so they had, pews, and Rich ended up selling the pews. Well, I'll let Rich tell the story of how he came to found Sparta Sound. A little bit of backstory on Rich. As I mentioned, he grew up in Eveleth, was musical from a young age, ended up moving to the Twin Cities and spending about 20 years based in Minneapolis. Was very busy at that time, was in a bunch of bands, opened a basement recording studio, and that was where he really flourished as a professional musician and got a lot of experience as a recording engineer. Then he's thought he was going to be in Minneapolis for the long haul, but here's what happened.
I'd never in a million years thought that I'd be moving back to the Iron Range. It was summer of 2005, and I was up visiting my mom. My brother had moved back here, and he was going through some stuff. I was going through some stuff, and I saw this listing for this place, and I said, Mom, I'm going to go look at that church in Sparta and just see what it looks like, just check it out. And I came through that front door, and it just kind of, I became obsessed with it. Just the perfect layout, just the idea that, and the internet was really taking off in 2005. I just had this idea that I could operate from anywhere and keep in touch with people and, keep what I had going. And it's a 3-hour drive to Minneapolis, an hour to Duluth, which is a great music city. And I figured I could make it work and keep the band together. And, the clientele that I built up in Minneapolis, a lot of people, I could see them making the trip up, and it all kind of fell into place. And next thing you know, I'm sleeping on the altar with my dog going, what the hell just happened?
So I'm wondering, Jay, after our visit there, seeing it in person, how does it compare or contrast from any other recording studios you've visited? I imagine you visited at least some in your time.
Oh, yeah. It's the point of comparison I keep making is Pachyderm Studios in Cannon Falls, Minnesota. That is maybe the most famous recording studio in Minnesota, has been around for decades, was recently restored, and is now absolutely gorgeous. It's a house and a recording studio. Not quite sure how the spaces were originally configured, but you drive to Cannon Falls, which feels like you're kind of getting out of town a little bit if you're comparing it to, say, Minneapolis. And you get to this sort of destination recording studio where you have this house, you have this studio, you have a little bit of a woodsy vibe in the setting, so it does sort of feel like you're on a bit of a retreat. That studio, Pachyderm, is famed for being, among other things, the studio where In Utero was recorded, Nirvana's album. So it's a pretty big deal, and a lot of recording happens there now. A lot of contemporary, popular artists today in Minnesota record there. Trampled by Turtles, their new collaboration with Alan Sparhawk was recorded there. They've done a bunch of stuff there. All sorts of big artists here record there now, and then also artists from out of town come there. So Sparta Sound, I would say, has that vibe in that it feels like it's not like a studio in a building in the middle of a city. It is sort of a destination studio with this house component where bands will come to record and very often then will stay right on the premises. So it does feel like it's kind of a retreat with, whoever your musical collaborators are, your band, your what have you, and just like take that Pachyderm vibe, and Cannon Falls again feels like it's a little way out of the Twin Cities, but keep on going, get up to Duluth, then keep on going, get to the Iron Range. And so Sparta Sound has an even more isolated vibe, and it's a little bit, cozier, homier, I would say, than Pachyderm. Pachyderm is a, very top-notch recording studio with absolute, state-of-the-art equipment. I talked about it a little bit with Rich, and, he admitted he's got very good stuff at Sparta Sound. But, Pachyderm is really kind of next level in terms of just the level of equipment they have there. But, Sparta Sound is absolutely, professional setup. It just has that little bit of a cozier, homier vibe to it.
Mm-hmm. And what kind of artists record there? Who's the who there?
So I asked Rich to name some of the artists. I knew some of the artists that have recorded at Sparta Sound, and I kind of thought he'd be ready to just sort of like rip off a list of 20 or so artists that are big names. And here's actually what he said when I asked him.
Well, let's see. Just recently, Salty Dog, Boss Mama and the Jabber Hooch, Trampled by Turtles, Man Heat. Oh, there's so many. Baby Eyes. There's so many. I was going to make a list just so I don't leave anybody out, because there's been a lot of Duluth bands that have come up here.
It's sort of like if someone asks you, okay, name some of your friends. And you're like, whoa, I mean, you have so many friends. You're like, well, I guess I could start naming some names, but I kind of have a lot of friends, and it feels weird to like start with this friend or start with that friend. So, the fact that Rich was a little bit hesitant, like naming names, well, it wasn't because there's a short list of artists that have recorded there. It's because, where do you even start? There are so many. And I hope you got that sense from his comments. He later sent the very long list to me. So right now I'm looking at this list of hundreds of artists. I figured there are around, I had to copy and paste this into a numbered list to actually get the count. And it looks like there are almost 300 artists who have recorded at Sparta Sound in its 20 years of operation. But a lot of those are repeat customers. So there have been many more than 300 sessions over the course of Sparta Sound's history. So yeah, big names include Trampled by Turtles, but just running down this list, we're talking about Josie Langhorst, Brianne Murray and the Front Porch Sinners, Steve Sokola, great story about Steve Sokola in a sec, Run Westy Run, Kaylee Matuzak, Martin Devaney from the Twin Cities, Dan Israel, also from the Twin Cities, Mississippi, Mike Wolf, Duluth Standby, Annie Humphrey, Scarlett Rivera, known for playing on Bob Dylan's album Desire, she's a violinist, Christopher David Hansen, Glitterati, Duluth beloved, Belfast Cowboys, Dan Israel, Keith Sokola, the White Iron Band, great story about them as well coming up, Cars and Trucks, Duluth Legends. So just this great mix. Rich estimates that about a third of the artists who record with him are from the Twin Cities. About a third are from Duluth, and about a third then are actually from up on the range. So Steve Sokola, do we need to remind people who Steve Sokola is?
As we said before, like he just keeps reappearing and reappearing on this podcast. I mean, he has a full episode dedicated just to him, but he's made many appearances. He's kind of like the Northlands version of Stan Lee. Rest in peace.
Absolutely. That is true. Well, yeah. So if you need to be reminded who Steve Sokola is, you can go back and listen to the episode all about him. But here's Jermaine's story about one of the several times that Steve Sokola has been at Sparta Sound recording.
Of course, you may be familiar with Steven Sokola. So one time, I was coming in between a couple appointments I had, and our neighbor decided to mow the lawn. And it was a lovely day, of course, and we had some of the windows open, And Steve was trying to get his parts down, and it was a really like beautiful, quieter song. And Steve walked over. I mean, we didn't know he was going to do it. He just walked over there and said to our neighbor, very nicely, he said, "I've got the song I'm trying to record. I'm just wondering if you could maybe just stop mowing the lawn for just a few minutes so I can finish it." And, I was like, oh gosh, this neighbor, I'm like, oh, this is gonna go over okay? And they were like, no problem, sure. He made friends with them, of course he did, because we all know Steve Sokola. And he came back, did a song.
And of course, if you know Steve Sokola, you recognize his voice. How do you say no to that? Such a nice voice, nice man.
He's a charismatic guy. But I think that story also illustrates, just how sort of rural and bucolic this studio feels, that you probably don't have as much sound insulation as you might have at an urban studio you would need to have, because it's just so generally so quiet that if someone, in a neighboring house decides to mow his lawn, you're going to hear that in the studio. And the fact that that is not usually an issue just shows how, relatively isolated this studio is.
And so you already kind of alluded to this a little bit earlier, but part of the deal is that musicians can stay overnight. In fact, there's in the recording room itself, above it, there's an area, a very small area with a bed on top of the actual recording booth.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, it's worth stating that not only did Rich convert Sparta Sound from a church to a recording studio, he also converted it to a home. He said that previously no one had lived there. So one of the things that he did when he sold the pews on eBay and got some money, he put a shower in. There hadn't been a need for that before. So he's converting it to be a home for himself, and then later Jermaine as well to live in, but then also, yes, converting it to be a recording studio. So yeah, as you mentioned, that sort of the booth for the the mixing board has a little you can climb up on top of it, and there's a spot to sleep up there. But then there are also mattresses that they keep in what was once the church entryway, and people I'm sure bring their own stuff sometimes, but yeah, they'll bring, and well, I'll let Jermaine tell the story of the maximum number of people they've had staying there at once.
Yeah, we get so many different age groups and so many different styles of music. We've had the Holy Hootenanners here, 15 people slept here one time, and we can comfortably accommodate with mattresses probably about, 4 or 5 beds. There were blow-up mattresses in the living room, like everywhere you walk was like a little maze to walk through to get to the kitchen. And that was kind of fun because that was the most people we probably had in here for a session and had sleepover.
It's interesting how with the frequency and the number of sessions they've done, how it becomes an interwoven part of their lives, and it is also their living space.
Yeah, Jermaine and Rich are both musicians. They've played in a number of different projects. Right now, they have a band called Rich Mattson and the North Stars, of which Jermaine is a member. Sometimes they play as a duo. So, they're working musicians themselves, too. And so this is really sort of their people when musicians come up. And Jermaine pointed out that given that Sparta/Eveleth is a little geographically isolated, it is nice that when the world comes to you. But she said, yeah, it's basically just a camping out vibe.
And it's really busy at times, where the house can be for 3 days. People here, they sleep here, they eat all their meals here. So, get up every morning together, and, who's ever up first just makes coffee. We just, we're, just pretty laid back. People, will pack like they're going to the cabin, and a lot of meals will be communal and shared, which is really nice, or else people just snack on their own.
So to just sort of describe the space, you have that former sanctuary that now functions as the live room for recording, and you open one door and you're standing in the living room of the home, and the kitchen also is right there. So your living space and your recording studio really are, very much together.
And so going off that then, does the music ever escape the studio and venture into the rest of the home?
Yeah, I'm sure when a session is happening, especially if it's a louder band, you are hearing it all through the home and probably through much of Sparta. But Jermaine had a great story about one group who decided that they wanted to mix things up a little bit and actually do some recording outside the studio portion of Sparta Sound.
We have had over the years a band you may have heard of called the White Iron Band. And they're just a fun bunch of guys. And I met them when I was living in Ely because some of them went to college there. But they always really brought it when they came, and they're a fun bunch. But there was a song that it might have been near the end of the night, probably about 1 a.m, I'm guessing. It was late. And, you know, sometimes sessions go late. They had this idea that they wanted to record it in the kitchen and not in the studio. And so they hung a mic over, like, we have these ceiling panels in the kitchen, like kind of like you would see in here, and dangled a microphone down. And they just hootenannied it up, stomping their feet and clapping and doing this whole song. They made a video. It's out there on YouTube. Pictures were falling off the walls. It was crazy, but it turned out amazing. It was just, that was a pretty awesome experience, which maybe not everyone would love that in their house, but yeah, watching things fall off the walls and this microphone swinging back and forth in the living room and the kitchen. But yeah, that was an extra special moment, I would definitely say, for sure.
Actually interviewed Brianne Tepler of Brianne Marie and the Front Porch Sinners. We had a chat at Bent Paddle and caught up about her experience recording at Sparta Sound, where she's actually recorded 3 projects with her band. So she loves recording there. And as I said to her, so from your perspective as a musician, what's special about Sparta Sound? And she said much of what you've already heard Rich and Jermaine speak about, which is it's nice to be able to go and stay at a place for a few days and really concentrate on the work. She said that's also really convenient if you have a day job like most musicians do, like she and all the members of her band do, is, okay, so you get your Friday off and you've got a long weekend, 3 days. You can go stay overnight and really put in, a few long days, but get a whole album tracked if you know what you're doing. And she said it's so old school. Rich will burn a CD for you, and you can take a listen to it right there, or put it in the car on the way home. She said it's that sort of personal touch to make sure that he knows you are happy with what you've produced there. And she said ultimately, as cool as the space is, and as well as it is set up now with recording instruments and instruments that you can play, there's a piano, there's all sorts of stuff Rich and Jermaine have collected over the years. She said ultimately what is special about Sparta Sound is Rich and Jermaine, that they're so kind, so musically sort of smart and generous, and have such a great history. She said, you can really draw on Rich's long history of knowledge as a recording engineer to achieve what you want to achieve. So really, that's the heart of Sparta Sound, is Rich and Jermaine.
Mm-hmm. It's nice that you got to hear from an actual artist that has recorded there and hear about their experience, especially considering how often it seems like people return to record there. But what has the studio meant for the Iron Range area?
Yeah, this was when I was starting at the Current in 2013. So Sparta Sound by that point had been around for several years. And part of the buzz around the studio, at least, if you sort of think of this from the Twin Cities perspective, trying to understand what's going on up there at Sparta Sound, which, at that point was producing increasing number of recordings, was that it's not just cool that there's this studio that is available for people in this really neat destination space, but also it was seen as sort of a renaissance, as part of a renaissance of music on the Iron Range. Rich has a sort of loose organization known as IROMA, that is the Iron Range Original Music Association. And he created that to support artists and venues and basically everyone working on the Iron Range to support and encourage original music. Here's Rich's take on what his studio has meant to the Iron Range.
When word started getting around that I had this recording studio here, the freaks came out of the woodwork. I couldn't believe the amount of talent there is just in all these little towns. There's an older fellow that lives probably about a mile away, and he came in, he probably recorded about, 40, 50 songs with his family band. And I'm sitting here just going, oh, we're gonna do this again next week? Yeah, I've got another batch of songs, and I've got more songs, and he just recorded so many tunes, and they're really good. And the thing is, the Iron Range was all cover bands, and I don't know, it's kind of like all that was kind of getting old. Like everybody was playing the same tunes, and some of those songs are just so worn out. Like it's like Louie Louie or something, or just heard it enough where original music is really a breath of fresh air, for lack of a better term. It's just people love hearing it, and there's a lot of support for it. And the bars were kind of slowing down. The whole live music thing was kind of getting a little passé, and I feel like just having original music and bars that would support it, and then there were people that would come out and support that, and just kind of breathe new life into it. It's been a lot of fun.
So if you think about it, if you're a musician who's written some original music, you're living up on the range. I mean, honestly, in Duluth, it can be hard enough to find a good studio that works for you, especially if you're an indie artist, need some support or what have you, which obviously applies to a lot of people. It's a great resource for artists from Duluth, enough of a resource that people come up from the Twin Cities all the time to use it. But certainly if you're on the range, to have this professional studio just, right there within easy driving distance, it's been an incredible resource. Rich talked about, one artist who came and just has dozens of songs, that they've been performing for a while, but never had, put these songs on record. And now the studio's here, all of a sudden, they're recording these dozens of songs. And we're just like, they're all great. And he just has more and more and more, and never really had a studio that was convenient enough or that worked well enough to put them on record. But now that Sparta Sound is there, that music is recorded, is released. And so, I mean, if you imagine a world without Sparta Sound on the Iron Range, most likely there would be a lot of artists like that, music like that maybe doesn't get documented, gets performed live and never gets recorded, or doesn't get recorded as well, or, publicized as widely. So there are certainly a lot of artists who benefited from that in the Range, Duluth, and beyond.
And now as Sparta Sound approaches its 20-year anniversary, what does the future look like for it?
I asked Rich. Here's what he had to say.
Yeah, I don't have any plans to move anywhere after this. I mean, this is kind of living the dream for me. This is where I want to be. It's been a lot of fun, and as long as my ears hold up, I want to continue doing it.
I like to think that's kind of how we all approach doing the things that we love, is do it as long as you can do it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's clearly just a home and a haven for Rich and Jermaine, and you can just feel when you're there. Although there were no other musicians there when we were there, you can see as Brianne put it when we spoke. She said, when you get there, you feel like you're walking to someone's home, and it's someone's home where you want to be. Because we've all been in those situations where you walk into a house and you're like, oh, this is awkward. I could get out of here. But it really feels like a place where you feel welcomed and where you can relax. And, having worked at a radio station before where we did a lot of sessions, it produces a lot of incredible work. It was quite an opportunity to see all those artists play. But that was my opportunity as someone who's not a musician myself to see up close what it's like for a musician to go into the studio and prepare to record something. Now, in that case, it was mostly stuff they'd already recorded, and they were just doing a radio session. So it wasn't like this is the first time they're recording this material. But you really do need to get yourself into the right state of mind as an artist, and also come to terms with the fact that you're going to put something on record that is not going to be perfect, because it just never is, right? There's always something you would redo. I know I appreciate that as a writer, but as a writer, I can go back and change a word here, move things around. That's harder to do when you're in a recording studio. So it really is a really particular kind of focus that you need to have. And I can really see where, for a lot of artists, going to a place like Sparta Sound really would be an opportunity to feel really comfortable doing what you want to do on record.
Mm-hmm. And so, Jay, as you always anticipate this question, why do you think this fits into Northlandia?
Well, you heard when Rich was talking about people coming to use the studio. He used the phrase, the freaks came out of the woodwork. And it's clear from the context that is a very affectionate term, right? These are people who are off the beaten path in multiple senses of the word. Already artists, you're a little different as an artist. It takes a certain, creative mindset to be an artist and to invest the kind of time that you need to have a body of songs and have the, skill to record. It's already that it's kind of a bar to get there, but then to get there and then be on the Iron Range, which has its whole history and culture. It really is a particular group of Northlanders who are flocking to this studio. And looking at the studio, but then also looking at the stacks of tapes that Rich has. And yes, I do mean, physical tapes. He used to, use physical tape up in the loft where people sleep. They have stacks of tapes, and people will even give tapes to him. He said, people know that he has a studio and that he, is from the range and, cares about it. And so they'll give these tapes of people. He says some of them are decades old, and they were just so good. Like, these bands were so good, and they made this tape, and nothing more ever happened with it, or not much more ever happened with it. And so it's really, it's a way to preserve, celebrate, uplift this really distinctive Northland culture. And the fact that it is such an unusual place in itself, that you have to go to this sort of place with a bit of a ghost town vibe, not to, undersell what it is today and the people who live there and make it a community, but it does feel like a mining town that is not anymore. It feels like you're going, off the beaten path of a place that's maybe already a little bit off the beaten path, and you're really kind of going to this corner of Minnesota, of the Northland, of the Midwest, that feels a little isolated, but has a special vibe to it where you feel like, boy, I'm never going to forget this place. So I think in that sense, it shares a lot of qualities with other places that people love in the Northland. People, I think, come from the cities and kind of get that vibe. If they go to their favorite bar in Duluth, and you think about, okay, just intensify that, turn the levels up, and to use a recording studio metaphor on that, and you kind of get to what Sparta Sound is. And it's clearly a place that, people here and beyond have really responded to.
Mm-hmm. A true musical haven for the Northland.
Yeah, and again, speaks to the theme of preservation, which comes up so much, at least in the pieces that I write for Northlandia. This is a community that loves to preserve things. And a lot of times that means you're talking about architecture that has been preserved or traditions that have been preserved. But this is, that's what a recording studio is by definition, is you're putting something on record, and you are preserving it. And clearly there's nothing unique to the Northland about there being a recording studio, but if you kind of were to imagine in your head, what would a really distinctive Northland recording studio look and feel like, you really could imagine nothing more on brand than Sparta Sound.
All right, Jay, I think that's the perfect spot to leave it off. Thanks so much for joining us. Before we wrap up fully, I just want to give an opportunity, if there's anything you want to plug that you're working on, or anything you want to make readers or listeners aware of that you're working on.
Well, Wyatt, you and I are working on a podcast project that people will be hearing a lot more about this fall. So podcast listeners can get excited for our next big project. And it's going to involve the longest road trip that you and I have taken in our, I don't think either of us has gone this far, let alone together at the DNT. And that's happening.
Not for the DNT, no.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So that's happening just as we record in the next few days. So we're working hard to gather some elements for what we hope will be a really powerful podcast project.
Yeah, listeners, keep an eye out for that. We'll let you know more about that as we get closer to it. Jay, thanks again for joining.
Yeah, thanks, Wyatt.
And thank you for joining us in this venture into Northlandia. To read the article for this week's column, see photos, and watch video produced by myself, visit DuluthNewsTribune.com/topic/Northlandia. If you enjoy this podcast and would like to support us, consider becoming a subscriber to the Duluth News Tribune at DuluthNewsTribune.com/subscribe. Join us again next time and discover the extraordinary stories that you just might miss. You're on the right place at the right time, ready to step off the beaten path in the rush to return, here in Northlandia.